The most alarming part wasn't the draw, it was what happened after it. Portugal walked into a World Cup match against DR Congo as one of the favorites. 90 minutes later, they walked out with a 1-1 result that felt less like a setback and more like a warning. A warning that something inside this team may not be working anymore. And according to people close to the situation, there is a growing feeling inside the squad that nobody wants to discuss publicly. Players are fed up, not necessarily with Cristiano Ronaldo the legend, but with Cristiano Ronaldo the untouchable starter. Because what happened against DR Congo wasn't just a bad game. It looked like the latest chapter in a story that has been quietly building for years. The strange thing is that Portugal actually started perfectly. Just 6 minutes into the match, João Neves put them ahead. Everything seemed under control. Portugal had the lead. They had superior talent. They had more possession. They had the momentum. And then something bizarre happened. The game stopped progressing. Not literally, but tactically. Portugal kept the ball. They passed it around. They dominated possession. On paper, it looked comfortable, yet the longer the match continued, the more uncomfortable it became. The possession numbers climbed, the danger disappeared, the control was an illusion. By the end of the night, Portugal had spent most of the match moving the ball without actually hurting anyone, and DR Congo started realizing it. That's when the statistics became impossible to ignore. Portugal finished with around 75% possession, but possession wasn't winning them the game. DR Congo began creating the better chances. The underdogs looked more dangerous, more direct, more threatening, and eventually they found the equalizer. Suddenly the favorite wasn't controlling the match. They were surviving it. An underdog had walked into one of football's biggest stages and looked completely unafraid. That alone was embarrassing. But then people started looking closer at one player, Cristiano Ronaldo, and that's where the conversation became much more uncomfortable, because the numbers weren't just bad, they were shocking. 0 shots on target, 0 chances created, just 25 touches across 90 minutes. For most players, that would be disappointing. For the focal point of Portugal's attack, it was devastating, especially because this wasn't some isolated off night. That's the part that keeps resurfacing. This wasn't a surprise anymore. It was beginning to look like a pattern, a very long pattern, the kind of pattern that becomes impossible to explain away, the kind that forces people to ask questions they previously avoided. Because when supporters looked beyond this match, they found something even more concerning. The drought, major tournament after major tournament, game after game. The goals weren't arriving. The impact wasn't arriving. The moments that once defined Ronaldo's career were becoming increasingly rare, and that's where the debate changed completely. At first, the discussion was about finishing, then it became about form, now it was becoming about function. What exactly is Portugal getting from Ronaldo's presence? That question would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Now it's being asked everywhere. Because football is ruthless. It doesn't care about memories. It doesn't care about highlights. It doesn't care about records. It cares about what happens right now. And right now, many observers are seeing a Portugal team that appears to be carrying a burden nobody wants to describe publicly. Some analysts call it a tactical limitation, others call it something more dangerous. A quiet tax, a cost paid by everyone else on the pitch. Think about the players surrounding him: Bruno Fernandes, Bernardo Silva, Vitinha, some of the most intelligent creators in world football. Players who thrive on movement, rotation, interchange, fluidity, constant unpredictability. Yet whenever Portugal attacks, there are moments where everything seems to slow down. The objective becomes simpler. Get the ball to Ronaldo, find Ronaldo, cross to Ronaldo, wait for Ronaldo, and that's where frustration begins emerging, because modern football increasingly rewards mobility, space creation, collective movement, but Portugal often appear trapped between two identities. The football that best suits their current squad, and the football required to accommodate their biggest star. Those aren't always the same thing, and that's where insiders claim tensions have started appearing. Not dramatic public confrontations, nothing that obvious. Professional players rarely operate that way. Instead, it's the smaller signs, the conversations, the body language, the unspoken questions, the feeling that certain players are sacrificing parts of their own game to support someone whose influence is declining. And once people started noticing it, they couldn't couldn't stop noticing it. Every attack suddenly looked different. Every missed opportunity raised new questions. Every stagnant possession sequence became evidence for one side or the other. Then came the comparisons, and they weren't helping Ronaldo's case. Across the tournament, other superstars were delivering. Lionel Messi was influencing matches. Kylian Mbappe was terrifying defenses. Erling Haaland was doing what he always does, producing, deciding games, creating fear. Meanwhile, Portugal's biggest star was becoming increasingly disconnected from the action. The contrast was brutal, not because Ronaldo was competing against those players directly, but because football fans naturally compare icons, and when one legend appears to be moving forward while another appears to be standing still, people notice. Fast. The criticism grew louder. Former players joined the conversation. Pundits joined the conversation. Television debates became increasingly direct. The language changed. At first it was respectful concern, then it became tactical criticism, then something else happened. People stopped talking about protecting Ronaldo's feelings and started talking about Portugal's chances. That shift matters, because once the focus moves from the individual to the national team, emotions change. The question is no longer, does Ronaldo deserve respect? Of course he does. The question becomes, can Portugal maximize their potential with him in the lineup? That's a much harder question, and the answer isn't as unanimous as it once was. In fact, many people point toward a moment from the past that suddenly looks very relevant: the 2022 World Cup, when Fernando Santos made one of the most controversial decisions in modern football. He benched Cristiano Ronaldo. At the time, many treated it as football heresy. How could you possibly leave one of the greatest players ever on the bench? Then something unexpected happened. Portugal looked liberated. The attack moved faster. The combinations became sharper. The team appeared freer. Not perfect, but different. Very different. And ever since then, an uncomfortable possibility has hovered over Portuguese football. What if the future arrived before everyone was ready to admit it? That's the question Roberto Martinez now faces. And his situation is uniquely complicated, because managers usually have political calculations, future contracts, long-term relationships, career consequences. But Martinez is reportedly leaving after the tournament, which creates a fascinating dilemma. What does a coach do when he has nothing left to protect? Does he remain loyal to a legend, or does he make the decision he genuinely believes gives Portugal the best chance to win? Because those may no longer be the same choice, and that possibility alone has transformed this into one of the biggest stories surrounding the national team. The defenders of Ronaldo make an important argument. They point to leadership, experience, mentality, influence inside the dressing room, and they're not wrong. Those things matter, especially in tournament football. You cannot measure everything with statistics. You cannot reduce a career like Ronaldo's to a spreadsheet. That's fair, but critics immediately respond with another question. If leadership is the primary argument, then what happens when leadership starts occupying a position that could be filled by a more productive player? That's where the controversy refuses to disappear, because neither side can completely dismiss the other. One side sees a legend whose presence still elevates the group. The other sees a legend whose status prevents necessary evolution, and every match adds new evidence without delivering a final answer, which is exactly why tensions continue growing. Because this is no longer about one result. It's no longer about one draw. It's no longer even about one player. It's about trust. Trust in decision-making. Trust in meritocracy. Trust that the best version of Portugal is actually being put on the field. Once fans begin questioning that, the conversation becomes much bigger than football. And after the DR Congo match, those questions became impossible to avoid, especially when Ronaldo's performance was measured against the expectations attached to his role. The image that lingered wasn't the early Portuguese goal. It wasn't the possession statistics. It wasn't even the equalizer. It was the growing sense that Portugal might be confronting a reality they've spent years trying to postpone. Every great athlete eventually reaches a point where reputation and performance begin moving in opposite directions. The gap starts small, then it widens, then one day everyone notices, and when everyone notices, the discussion becomes unavoidable. That's where Portugal appears to be now, not at the end of Ronaldo's legacy. That legacy was secured long ago, but at a crossroads, a moment where the team must decide what matters more: the history that brought them here, or the future that could take them further. Because if players really are growing frustrated, if the tactical compromises are real, if the performances continue trending in the same direction, then the biggest threat to Portugal's World Cup ambitions may not be any opponent they face. It may be their inability to answer a question that becomes more uncomfortable after every match. Are they still building around Cristiano Ronaldo because it's the best football decision, or because nobody wants to be the one who finally says the era is over?